For 3 years, she carried a secret so classified that even mentioning it could end her career. But when she used a single hand signal in the Pentagon, Captain Victoria Hayes adjusted her dress uniform one final time before entering the Pentagon's most intimidating corridor. The polished marble floors reflected the fluorescent lights above, creating an almost mirror-like pathway that seemed to stretch endlessly toward her destination. Room 4 times 10 to the power of 792, the office of General Robert Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. Victoria had heard the stories whispered in officer clubs and mess halls across 4 continents. Harrison was old-school military, a Gulf War veteran who had clawed his way up from enlisted ranks to become one of the most feared and respected generals in the Army. He was known for his unconventional methods of evaluating officers, often putting them through psychological tests disguised as casual conversation. Some called him brilliant, others called him ruthless. Victoria suspected he was both. The heavy oak door bore a simple nameplate: General R. Harrison, Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence. Victoria knocked twice, her knuckles producing a sharp sound that echoed in the hallway. Enter came a gravelly voice from within. The office was exactly what Victoria had expected. Walls lined with commendations, photographs of Harrison with presidents and foreign dignitaries, and a massive mahogany desk that dominated the room like an aircraft carrier in a harbor. Behind it sat General Harrison himself, a man in his early 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance in seconds. "Captain Hayes," he said without looking up from her file. "West Point, top 5% of your class. Intelligence officer with deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan." And he flipped through pages. "Interesting. Some classified locations that aren't specified here." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "Have a seat." Victoria settled into the leather chair across from his desk, maintaining perfect posture despite the chair's attempt to swallow her whole. The general continued flipping through her file, occasionally making small sounds of approval or interest. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning and the muffled sounds of Pentagon life beyond the thick walls. "Tell me, Captain," Harrison said suddenly, closing her file with a snap, "what do you think separates good intelligence officers from great ones?" Victoria had prepared for this type of question. "Attention to detail, sir. The ability to see patterns where others see chaos, and the wisdom to know when information is actionable versus merely interesting." Harrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Textbook answer. But you know what I think?" He stood and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. "I think what separates them is the willingness to act on incomplete information. Most officers wait for certainty. Great ones operate in gray areas where certainty doesn't exist." He turned back to face her. "Your file mentions several classified assignments. Care to elaborate?" Victoria chose her words carefully. "I've served in various capacities that required specialized training and security clearances beyond standard intelligence operations, sir." Some details remain compartmentalized. Harrison nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Of course they do." He returned to his desk and pulled out a different folder, this one noticeably thicker than her standard personnel file. The red stripe along its edge indicated information classified at levels that made Victoria's pulse quicken slightly. This file, however, tells a different story, one involving operations that officially never happened and training that doesn't appear in any public record. He opened it and began reading. Joint Special Operations Command, Defense Intelligence Agency, Special Access Programs. Counterintelligence field operations in locations that remain classified, even in this room. Victoria maintained her composure, but internally she felt the familiar tension that came with walking the razor's edge between operational security and career advancement. "Sir," Victoria said carefully, "I'm not sure what specific information you're referencing, but I can confirm that my security clearances and need-to-know authorizations have always been properly maintained according to established protocols." Harrison smiled, and it wasn't entirely reassuring. "Captain, I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is dancing around the truth. Your clearances aren't just properly maintained, they're at levels that most colonels never achieve. He closed the classified folder and leaned forward. The question isn't whether you're qualified for what I have in mind. The question is whether you're ready to use those qualifications in ways that will make your previous assignments look like training exercises. Victoria felt her heart rate increase slightly, but kept her expression neutral. I'm prepared to serve wherever the Army needs me, sir. Wherever my skills can be most effectively utilized. That's what I was hoping to hear. Harrison stood again and walked to a secure safe built into the office wall. The combination lock required both a numeric code and a biometric scanner. Victoria noticed the additional security measures, indicators that whatever he was retrieving operated at classification levels that made even her background seem conventional. He returned with a single sheet of paper sealed in a clear protective sleeve. The document bore markings she recognized but had only seen twice before in her career. Special access required. Eyes only, no foreign nationals. Classifications that meant careers could end simply for being in the same room as unauthorized personnel during a briefing. Captain Hayes, what I'm about to show you represents a convergence of intelligence indicating a threat to national security that requires immediate attention. Harrison placed the document on his desk, positioning it so she could read without touching. The threat assessment involves hostile intelligence services that have demonstrated capabilities exceeding our previous estimates. Victoria scanned the document quickly, her trained eye picking up key details. Foreign operatives, domestic infrastructure targets, coordinated timing suggesting a sophisticated operation planned by professionals who understood American security protocols intimately. This wasn't random terrorism or opportunistic crime. This was state-sponsored intelligence warfare. Sir, Victoria said after finishing her review of the document, this intelligence suggests coordination between multiple hostile services. The timing windows and target selection indicate planning that required months of preparation and access to classified information about our security protocols. Harrison nodded approvingly. Exactly the kind of analysis I expected from someone with your background. Now here's what makes this particularly concerning. He retrieved another document from the safe, this one bearing even more restrictive classification markings. We have reason to believe that the coordination you identified isn't just between foreign services. There are indicators suggesting domestic assistance from individuals with legitimate access to the systems they're targeting. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office's air conditioning. Domestic assistance meant insider threats, Americans with security clearances who were either compromised or actively working against national interests. The implications were staggering. Sir, are we talking about a penetration of our intelligence community? Potentially. Harrison's expression grew grimmer. Which brings me to why you're here. The investigation requires someone with your specific skill set and security clearances, but more importantly, someone who isn't part of the existing intelligence infrastructure that may have been compromised. You're clean, Captain. No established relationships within the agencies that might be affected, no patterns that hostile services could have mapped and predicted. Victoria understood immediately. She was being recruited as an outside investigator specifically because she existed outside the normal intelligence community networks that might harbor the insider threat they were hunting. Her isolation from those networks, which had sometimes felt like a career limitation, was now her primary qualification. What exactly will my role involve, sir? Deep cover investigation. You would be inserted into situations where we suspect hostile activity, tasked with identifying the domestic contacts and determining the scope of their access to classified information. Harrison paused, letting the weight of the assignment settle. This isn't conventional intelligence work, Captain. You'd be operating with minimal support, maximum exposure, and the knowledge that some of the people you encounter might be Americans actively working to harm American interests. Victoria absorbed the implications of what Harrison was proposing. Deep cover work against domestic threats represented the most dangerous type of intelligence operation, where the enemy might be sitting in the next office or attending the same security briefings. The psychological strain of constant suspicion could destroy careers and personal relationships. Sir, she said carefully, I understand the gravity of what you're describing. How would operational security be maintained when the threat potentially includes individuals with access to the same classified systems that would support my cover identity? Harrison smiled grimly. That's where your unique background becomes invaluable. Your previous assignments have required you to operate with compartmented information and minimal oversight. You're accustomed to working in environments where traditional support structures might be compromised or unavailable. Victoria recognized the truth in his assessment. Her specialized training had included scenarios where she couldn't trust normal communication channels or rely on standard intelligence support. Operating in gray areas where certainty didn't exist, as Harrison had put it earlier. But this operation would push those skills to their absolute limits. What will be my timeline for preparation and deployment, sir? Harrison consulted a calendar on his desk. Immediate. The intelligence indicates that the hostile operation is approaching an execution phase. We have perhaps 6 weeks before they move to active implementation of whatever they're planning. Your preparation would need to be accelerated accordingly. 6 weeks. Victoria had participated in rapid deployment scenarios before, but those had involved conventional military targets with established intelligence support. This would require her to build an entirely new operational identity while simultaneously investigating threats that might include people monitoring the very systems used to create that identity. The circular security challenges were staggering. Sir, I need to ask about legal authorities and operational boundaries. If the investigation identifies American citizens engaged in espionage or treason, what protocols govern evidence collection and potential arrests? That's being handled at levels above both our pay grades, Harrison replied. Your role would be strictly intelligence gathering and threat assessment. Other agencies would handle enforcement actions based on your findings. Victoria considered the operational framework Harrison was describing. Intelligence gathering without enforcement authority meant she would be identifying traitors while having no direct power to stop them. The psychological pressure of watching potential threats continue their activities while building cases would be enormous. Sir, she said, given the time constraints and security concerns, how would I communicate findings without risking compromise of the investigation? Harrison opened a drawer and removed a device Victoria didn't recognize. Custom encrypted communication system, he explained. Direct satellite link that bypasses all conventional intelligence networks. Your reports would come directly to me through channels that exist outside normal intelligence community infrastructure. The device was smaller than a standard military radio, but obviously more sophisticated. Victoria could see multiple encryption indicators and what appeared to be biometric security features. The technology represented capabilities beyond anything she'd encountered in previous assignments. Your cover identity would be established through parallel systems that don't intersect with standard military personnel databases, Harrison continued. As far as conventional records are concerned, Captain Victoria Hayes will be assigned to routine staff duties at Fort McNair while the operation is active. But you won't actually be at Fort McNair. You'll be operating under an entirely different identity in locations where we suspect hostile activity is being coordinated. Victoria understood. Complete identity separation meant she would effectively cease to exist as herself for the duration of the operation. No contact with friends, family, or military colleagues who knew her real identity. Total isolation except for the encrypted communication link to Harrison. The psychological demands would be as challenging as the operational requirements. Sir, what specific locations are we discussing for deployment? Harrison consulted his classified folder again. Initially, a defense contractor facility in Northern Virginia, where several employees have exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with potential compromise. The facility handles classified contracts related to satellite communication systems and secure data networks. Exactly the type of infrastructure that hostile services would target for the kind of coordinated operation we're investigating. A defense contractor. Victoria recognized immediately that such facilities often employed former military personnel with security clearances, creating environments where an undercover military intelligence officer could blend in while having legitimate reasons to ask questions about security procedures and personnel backgrounds. The defense contractor facility would provide perfect cover for investigating insider threats while maintaining operational security. Victoria had worked in similar environments during previous assignments and understood how former military personnel transitioned between government service and private sector work while maintaining their security clearances. Sir, what would be my cover identity and supposed role at the contractor facility? Harrison slid another document across his desk. Technical systems analyst hired to conduct security assessments of their classified networks. Your military background and intelligence makes you a credible candidate, and the position gives you legitimate access to personnel files, security protocols, and behavioral patterns we need investigated. Victoria reviewed the cover identity documentation. The credentials were impeccable, complete with employment history that would satisfy background checks while explaining her knowledge of military procedures and security protocols. Someone had invested considerable effort in creating a bulletproof false identity. Your supposed employer would be Meridian Defense Solutions, Harrison continued. They specialize in cybersecurity assessments for facilities handling classified contracts. Your assignment would be conducting a comprehensive security review, which gives you reason to interview personnel, examine access logs, and investigate any irregularities in security procedures. The operational logic was sound. A security consultant asking questions about personnel and procedures wouldn't raise suspicions, and Victoria's real background would make her highly credible in that role. But the assignment also meant she would be actively searching for evidence of treason among people who might include the very individuals providing her operational support. Sir, what specific indicators should I be watching for among the facility personnel? Behavioral changes suggesting financial stress or ideological compromise, Harrison replied. Unusual contact with foreign nationals or unexplained travel patterns. Most importantly, access to information beyond what their official duties require, and any attempts to extract data from systems they shouldn't be examining. Victoria nodded, recognizing the classic indicators of insider threats that intelligence agencies have been tracking for decades. But identifying those patterns among people who legitimately held security clearances and worked with classified information would require extremely careful observation and analysis. The margin for error was essentially zero. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. Captain, I need to be completely honest about the risks you'd be facing. If hostile services have successfully placed assets within our defense contractor networks, they've demonstrated sophisticated operational capabilities. They'll be watching for exactly the kind of investigation you'd be conducting. Victoria understood the implications immediately. If her cover identity was discovered, she wouldn't just be facing career termination or criminal prosecution. Hostile intelligence services eliminated threats to their operations permanently, and an undercover American intelligence officer would represent an existential threat to their network. Sir, what contingency plans exist if my operational security is compromised? Harrison opened his safe once more and retrieved a final document. Emergency extraction procedures, he said, handing her the sealed envelope. Memorize the contents and destroy the document before deployment. If you determine that your cover is blown or you're in immediate danger, follow those procedures exactly. No improvisation, no attempts to salvage the mission. Victoria accepted the envelope, feeling its weight as both literal document and metaphorical responsibility. Emergency extraction meant the operation was dangerous enough that professionals had planned for the possibility she might need to disappear completely to survive. The psychology of working under that level of threat would require mental discipline beyond anything her previous training had demanded. How much time do I have to prepare mentally and operationally for this assignment, sir? 72 hours, Harrison replied. Your cover identity documentation will be ready tomorrow morning. Technical briefings on the contractor facility and personnel profiles will be provided tomorrow afternoon. You deploy Monday morning as Melissa Crawford, Senior Systems Analyst for Meridian Defense Solutions. 3 days to transform from Captain Victoria Hayes into a completely different person with a different background, different personality traits, and different professional relationships. Victoria had undergone similar identity transitions before, but never with such compressed timelines or such high stakes. The psychological preparation alone usually required weeks of careful mental conditioning. "Sir, I accept the assignment," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to undertake. Harrison stood and extended his hand across the desk. "Captain Hayes, you're about to undertake one of the most critical intelligence operations currently active within our national security framework. The success or failure of this mission could determine whether hostile services succeed in compromising infrastructure that protects millions of American citizens." Victoria shook his hand, recognizing the weight of responsibility he was placing on her shoulders. The handshake felt formal and final, marking the transition from briefing to operational commitment. "Sir," she said, "I won't let you down. I understand the stakes, and I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect American interests." "That's exactly what I expected to hear," Harrison replied. "But before you leave, I need to test something." He moved to his desk and made a subtle hand gesture, a quick movement that most people would dismiss as casual adjustment of his sleeve. The gesture was so brief and seemingly natural that Victoria almost missed its significance. But her specialized training had included recognition of covert communication signals used by intelligence operatives in situations where verbal communication might be monitored or compromised. The signal Harrison had just made was classified at levels that meant only personnel with very specific operational backgrounds would recognize its meaning. It was a test, Victoria realized. Harrison was determining whether her classified training included knowledge that would be essential for the deep cover operation he was proposing. The signal indicated friendly contact establishment in hostile environments, a communication method used when standard identification procedures weren't feasible. Victoria's response would tell Harrison whether she possessed the advanced training necessary for the mission's success. Without hesitation, Victoria made the corresponding countersignal, a precise hand movement that confirmed receipt of Harrison's message while indicating her own operational credentials. The exchange lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but Harrison's expression changed immediately. His earlier professional courtesy transformed into something approaching genuine respect. Few people would have recognized that signal. "Captain," he said quietly. Even fewer would have known the proper response. "Your operational background is exactly what this mission requires." Victoria maintained her composed expression despite the surge of recognition she felt at Harrison's acknowledgement. The signal exchange had been a critical test, and her successful response had shifted the entire dynamic of their meeting. She was no longer just another intelligence officer being briefed on a sensitive assignment. She was now confirmed as someone with access to operational knowledge that existed at the highest levels of classified training. "Sir," she said carefully, "I appreciate your confidence in my capabilities. That particular training was conducted under circumstances that remain compartmented even within my own service record." Harrison nodded slowly, his respect clearly genuine. "Which is exactly why you're perfect for this assignment. The hostile services we're investigating have demonstrated knowledge of our conventional intelligence procedures. They've adapted to standard operational security measures and communication protocols. But they haven't adapted to capabilities that exist outside normal intelligence community training programs." Victoria understood immediately. Her specialized background wasn't just an asset for this mission. It was potentially the decisive advantage that would allow her to operate successfully against adversaries who had already penetrated conventional intelligence networks. The very obscurity of her training made it valuable in ways that more visible qualifications couldn't match. Harrison returned to his safe and retrieved one final item, a small leather portfolio that bore no external markings. Inside this portfolio, he said, You'll find contact information for resources that don't appear in any official directory. People who can provide support or extraction if normal channels are compromised. But these contacts should only be used in absolute emergency situations. Victoria accepted the portfolio, understanding that she was being given access to operational resources that existed completely outside standard military and intelligence frameworks. Shadow networks that could operate independently of conventional command structures if those structures were compromised or unavailable. Captain Hayes, Harrison said as she prepared to leave, you now possess information and capabilities that make you one of the most valuable and most vulnerable intelligence assets currently operating. The knowledge you've demonstrated today confirms that you're qualified for this mission, but it also means that hostile services would consider you a priority target if they discovered your real identity. The weight of Harrison's final warning settled over Victoria as she prepared for dismissal. Being identified as a priority target by hostile intelligence services meant that discovery wouldn't just end her mission, it would likely end her life. Professional adversaries eliminated threats systematically, and an American intelligence officer with her level of training and access would represent an unacceptable risk to their operations. Sir, she said, I understand the risks and I'm prepared to accept them. This mission represents exactly the kind of challenge I've been trained to handle, regardless of personal consequences. Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression reflecting both admiration and concern. Captain, in my experience, the officers who volunteer for the most dangerous assignments often do so because they understand something that others don't. They recognize that some threats to our national security are so severe that personal risk becomes irrelevant compared to the potential consequences of failure. Victoria nodded, understanding that Harrison was acknowledging the fundamental calculus that drove people to accept assignments where survival wasn't guaranteed. The mathematics of service sometimes required individuals to place national interests above personal safety, and both she and Harrison recognized that this mission fell into that category. Your final briefings will begin tomorrow at 0600 hours at a facility in Arlington that isn't associated with any official government buildings, Harrison continued. The address is in your portfolio along with the emergency contact information. Memorize both and destroy the documents before you assume your cover identity. Victoria secured the portfolio in her uniform jacket, feeling the responsibility it represented. Tomorrow would begin her transformation from Captain Victoria Hayes into Melissa Crawford, Technical Systems Analyst. 3 days to become someone else completely while preparing to investigate threats that could be monitoring the very systems used to create her new identity. Sir, before I leave, may I ask how long you expect this operation to remain active? Harrison consulted his calendar again. Based on current intelligence assessments, we estimate that hostile operations will move to execution phase within 6 weeks. Your mission should conclude within that time frame, assuming successful identification of domestic assets and their methods of accessing classified information. 6 weeks to identify and neutralize a domestic insider threat that could compromise critical national security infrastructure. Victoria understood that the timeline wasn't arbitrary. It was based on intelligence indicating that hostile services were approaching the execution phase of whatever operation they had been planning. Missing that window could mean catastrophic consequences for American security interests. Understood, sir. I'll be prepared for tomorrow's briefing and ready to assume operational status according to your timeline. Victoria rose from her chair and came to attention, preparing to render a final salute before beginning the most dangerous assignment of her career. One more thing, Captain, Harrison said before she could salute. The signal exchange we conducted today will be our authentication method for emergency communications. If you need to contact me through channels other than the encrypted device, use that signal sequence. Anyone attempting to impersonate you won't know the proper response, and anyone attempting to impersonate me won't know the initial signal. Victoria nodded, understanding that Harrison was providing her with a final layer of operational security. In an environment where electronic communications might be monitored and standard identification procedures could be compromised. The specialized hand signals represented an authentication method that existed outside conventional intelligence networks. "Sir," she said, "it has been an honor to receive this assignment. I won't disappoint your confidence in my capabilities." Harrison returned her salute with military precision, but his expression carried undertones of personal respect that transcended normal command relationships. "Captain Hayes, you're about to undertake an operation that will require every aspect of your training and experience. Trust your instincts, follow your operational security protocols, and remember that sometimes the most important intelligence comes from sources that seem least significant." Victoria turned toward the office door, understanding that when she walked through it, she would begin a transformation that would culminate in her becoming someone else entirely. The next time she entered this office, she would either be reporting successful completion of a critical national security mission, or she wouldn't be entering at all. The corridor outside Harrison's office stretched ahead of her like a pathway into uncertainty. But Victoria Hayes had been trained for exactly this type of challenge.